Good morning, everyone. I'll wait for the slides. Yeah. So good morning, everyone. My name is Dmitry Alexeyev. I'm a principal UX researcher at Signify, a former Philips Lighting. And today I will tell you about our research journey from idea to the market to the release of the smart home entertainment system. And when I was chatting yesterday with some of you, I realized that many people are not aware about Signify and what it is. And as I said, Signify is new name for Philips Lighting, and I want to spend just 1 minute to say a few words about our company. So Signify is a leader in lighting in both professional and consumer domains. In the professional domain, we manufacture lamps and luminaires, but also systems and services like, for example, consultancy, design, maintenance, management, and so on. But I think our most known brand is Philips Hue. And Philips Hue is a best-selling wireless smart home connected lighting. And it was released in 2012. We started with just one type of the bulb and a hub, and by now we grew it in a complete ecosystem of lamps, luminaires, sensors, switches, and controls. And if we think of what are the key user benefits that Hue tries to bring, there's 4 kind of highlights there. The first one is about ambience creation. This is about create lighting that matches your mood. The other one is about daily activities. So when we talk about daily activities, it's about light that supports you waking up, falling asleep, concentrate, and relax. Then it's about feel secure. So feel secure is about automatic routines that you can activate when leaving home or entering the home or when you're away from home. And finally, in my view, the most exciting one is about entertainment. And this is about syncing your light with music, movies, and games to create more immersive experiences. In last Qual conference, I think in March, I was talking about the importance of the context when testing and evaluating different lighting systems. But today, I will zoom in into just one product or one feature that we developed recently. And as you can imagine, this is in entertainment domain. So I will take you behind the scene, and I will tell you about the research journey that we did, as I already said, from really the idea of this new proposition, of the new product, till the release. And this is about Hue and Spotify integration. This integration was announced a month ago and became available to the Hue users just 2 days ago. So that's why in the beginning I couldn't even disclose the title of my talk, because it was still a secret just a month ago. So you'll get a really fresh view on what we did behind the scene in terms of people research and UX research. So let's start from the beginning. Think for a moment about dynamic colored lighting. What associations you have with it in your mind? Where the last time you saw it? Just think for a moment. And if you do not have colored lighting at home, the most likely associations could be some dynamic lighting in a city. For example, in Berlin, you see a lot of colored lights. It's maybe a concert or a club. Again, another one of the areas where the colored lights is often used in a dynamic way. Or special events, like, for example, Christmas or Halloween. Again, this is the moments when we use often dynamic colored lights. And if you think about all of these situations, the dynamic lights often goes together with music. So these two are often combined. Which was not for our surprise. Immediately after Hue was released, in about a few months, the first third-party application appears called Hue Disco. And it was about using a microphone to listen to the music and create light effects, which was followed quite shortly with 2 other apps about Halloween and Christmas, so special apps to create light effects for Halloween and Christmas. And then it was followed by a multitude of apps that offer this feature of combining light and music, including our own Hue Sync application that was made for the PC computers. Now you think then, well, that need is already addressed. So there is an applications that allow you to combine light and music, or it's even oversaturated with a multitude of apps that support it. And that was also our initial thought, that we don't need to do anything in that domain because it's already addressed. But following the success of other entertainment propositions that we did around gaming and movies, we decided anyway revisit the music and see maybe there is a still opportunity for us. And we started from looking at how these apps are used and what people say about them. And more specifically, we looked at app reviews, we looked at discussions and posts that people put on the social networks. And what we find out is that while most of the people really enjoy the light effects, and if you see the review of these apps are really high, we discovered that a lot of people find them inconvenient to use. And what was the main reason for the inconvenience is that some of the apps, as the very first one, Hue Disco, use the microphone. So what you need to have the app is running, you need to put your phone next to the speaker so that it's not influenced by other noise, so it can really follow the music. Other apps were limited by the fact that you have to play the music on the same device on which device the application is running, which means it limited use with connected speakers, like for example Sonos or Google Home or Amazon Alexa. It also limited the use with the streaming services like Spotify. So realizing that we kind of decided to continue to explore it further. And our next step is to think about the activities where people listen to the music and where the light could actually bring some benefit. And if you think about all what this app's supporting was really about partying. But if you think about listening to music at home, partying is probably a least frequent activity, especially in COVID times. So what we did a large survey with our beta community where we just simply asked people, how do you listen to music at home? And what we find out essentially confirmed the early findings reported in the literature is that music is used as a background to make activities like cleaning or doing fitness at home less boring, or to help you to wind down and relax, or maybe help you concentrate when working. So that essentially tells us that maybe not all of these activities would benefit by adding light effects, but definitely it's not just partying. And as our next step, we decided to take one of the third-party apps and we asked about 12 participants to really explore and use it regularly for about 4 weeks. Just trying to understand how it would evolve over time and see how the people would use this, one of these popular applications. And what we found is that relaxing, working, and exercising, all of these activities benefited from adding the light effects. Now, with all of that, we then asked the participants, right, so you use it for 4 weeks, are you going to continue using it after the study? And only 3 people said they might. The rest said, I will not continue to using it, and the main reason for that were exactly the issues that I mentioned before, is that the fact that you needed the app running, so essentially your phone is kind of occupied with that specific activity. So if kind of summarize, the key pain points that we identified were a dependency on a device, the use of microphone, and really focus on the dynamic lighting effects that fit only one type of activity, like for example party or any kind of special events. Now, based on that, we tried to think, okay, how can we address these pain points and what needs to be, if you think of a new solution that would help create a better experience of combining light and music, what it needs to be able to do. And the first and foremost important was about being completely independent from the device or speakers that you listen to music on. Because if you think about it, people listen, you run it on your mobile phone, you start it, but it plays through your Sonos speakers. Or you run Spotify, and for example, on a smart TV, and it uses the speakers that's connected to it. So have that application be completely independent from the devices that you use. And in principle, it's possible if you use a cloud solution, because our lighting is connected, which means that we can generate and create light effects in the cloud and just directly send them to your light. Now, going for cloud solution, of course, introduces its own challenges. If you think about it, right, we need to know what music are you listening to, right? This is the first question. And the second question is, how do we synchronize music and light? Because if you want to create a compelling light effects, they need to go together with the music. And one way to address it, at least the one that we explored, was about partnering with streaming services. In our case, it's Spotify, because then, let's say, the Hue Cloud could communicate with Spotify Cloud, and we can get all of this information that we need to create the light effects. And the second key requirements, what we formulated, was around the use cases. If the previous applications are focused too much on really dynamic light effects, we realized that our application needs to support both the dynamic light effects, of course, but also needs to support other activities that require often less dynamic effects, like, for example, relaxing or working. So what we learned during this exploration phase. So this is essentially was exploration phase before we even started to consider or to develop anything. The first, and I think most of them are obvious, but I still want to reiterate it because that exercise kind of reminded us about the importance of doing these things. The first one is challenge and test your assumptions. By doing a social listening and usage data of our own app, we discovered that there is still a space for a better music and light integration than it was already existing in the market. The second, about convenience and ease of use. Now, convenience and ease of use for some of the applications is as important as a benefit this application brings. And it essentially can make or break it if the effort of receiving that benefit is too high, which was in case of many of these music apps, is that people would try it maybe once or twice, and then only few would continue using them, and most will just stop using it after first or two trials. And finally, it's about user needs, or I would say it about challenging essentially accepted beliefs or stereotypes. So if you think about music and light, the first thing that you think, oh, this is about a club or a disco. Right, so this is the thing that you think about. And if you look at how these apps that were existent on the market worked, they did the same. It would seem that combination of light and music only fits that very special niche of activities. But our exploration, we actually discovered that this maybe was driven by the limitations of the apps rather than by the genuine or actual user needs. So, with that, we concluded that we want to go further into the development, so that after that, we decided to start developing the application. Now, before I go into the development, I have a very short video here. This is essentially a commercial that we released for the Hue and Spotify, so it can be a little bit over the top, but at least it will show you what I mean by combining light and music in a home environment. Though I think it's also still about the party. With that, we concluded that we want to go further into the development, so that after that, we decided to start developing the application. In double. Now, before I go into the So as you see for the commercial, we also, of course, use the party and dynamic lighting. But in general, as we see, way more often it's used for more relaxing type of activities. But at least it gives you kind of an idea what do we mean by combining light and music in a home environment. Oh, okay, yeah. So as a next step, of course, partnering with Spotify solved this issue of convenience and ease of use. But it introduces another challenges. And as I mentioned, the challenge about the cloud solution is that if you partner with Spotify, we actually do not have access to the audio. So we have to create effects not based on the audio, but only based on metadata that Spotify provided us. Now, at that stage, our key research question was, can we create compelling light effects that still enhance your music listening experience, even though that it's only based on the audio metadata and not the audio itself? And so with that kind of in mind, we started a series of short iterations combining of lab and field studies. And here is, for example, you see an example of one of our lab study. I don't want to go in details on all of this study, so I will only highlight some of the key findings from that research that I think are more applicable to other applications, not only the one that we've been developing. Now, after the first lab study, where we kind of tested our algorithm initially and tried to fine-tune it, we very quickly go into the field. And again, as you can imagine, even if your lab study tries to resemble a home environment, like in our case, we had a home lab that resembles kind of an apartment, you will never kind of replicate the richness and the varieties of home environment. So that's why for us it was very important to very quickly step into the field and test it into the field. Another advantage of doing the field studies is that you can also test the performance of your system because of your connected system, a cloud system, so you could see and you can discover issues early on. And for example, in our case, in the laboratory studies, we had the perfect synchronization between music and light. So the effects worked amazing. Now, when we moved into the field, what we discovered that the experience between different users, depending on their setup, varied really greatly. And if you think about the synchronization of light and music, if even there is a bit of a shift or out of sync light effects from the music, the experience is completely ruined, even if the light effects themselves are amazing. So at the end, we had to actually introduce an additional user control that allowed them to adjust the latency between music and light effects depending on, for example, type of the speakers that they use, which we would never have discovered if we would just follow on laboratory studies. Another very interesting finding, and I think it's also related to the big change of how the development goes in terms of, let's say, lean and agile approach. I'll explain you what I mean by that. After these first studies, we did really short iterations, and we followed this idea of testing fast, but testing with a small group of users. So our test would have 5, maximum 10 participants. And when we felt quite confident that we're ready for a larger scale study, we ran a study with about 40 participants. And while the initial investigation was ending up with always a very positive results. People are really happy about the light effects, it's amazing, works great. We ran the large scale study and the results are negative. Some people liked it, but the majority were not satisfied with it. So there could be a couple of explanations for that. If you think about a lab study, then of course, the idea is that you have an ideal setup, a perfect synchronization. Of course, you have a bit of the impact of social desirability when the researcher is also there. So people tend to give a bit more positive feedback. But it's not the same in the field studies. So again, if you talk about a field study, we could think of 2 explanations. One is because of a simple chance, because we have a very small samples, like 5, maximum 10 people. It could have just happened by chance, is that we luckily or unluckily got the people who really like the way how we integrated the light and effects. And another explanation is that our early tests were presented and seen as a really early prototype. So people were having kind of maybe given us a benefit of the doubt, and which has actually worked against us later on, is that they would give a bit more positive feedback, seeing the combination of light and music as something that will be improved. And in a later study, it was more closer to and more felt like something that is going to be released. And then people realized, okay, if this is the light effects that you're going to release, then it's not good enough. And so that was, I'm not sure which one of those played the role, but in any case, for us, it would mean that we had to go back to the drawing board. And essentially what we did, we had to completely redo the algorithm, which has cost, of course, some time for us. And then we used the same larger user group to test it. And luckily, with that result, most of the people really liked the combination. And at the very end, which was actually happened this summer, we ran a really large-scale study with our beta community. So it's about a few hundred people who participated in that study. It was almost kind of ready to the released feature. And our beta platform, and I'm sure many of the companies that also use like a consumer boards or beta platforms, you know that the customers could share their ideas or maybe recommendations or maybe issues that they have, and other participants could also see it as well. And what we discovered when we did interviews, we started to see people bringing up the points that other people posted on the platform, which of course in a larger scale maybe not that important, but if you run a small-scale study, the fact that people see the comments from others, can have a discussion, could really impact the qualitative data. And what I mean by that is that you can end up with a fake consensus that is driven by the few very vocal participants of your study, instead of really individual view. So if you think about it, it's almost like unmoderated focus group, where you have a few people taken over. And as I said, in our case, I don't think it had a big impact because we had quite a large number of participants, but with the smaller studies, it's something now that we always take into account, is that this type of exchanges can influence our qualitative data when we do individual interviews afterwards. Now, this is the last one that I want to say about here is also very interesting, and I think any one of you who've done a UX research or was interested about UX research, you probably know that when you ask users or consumers about features, you have to be very careful, because in most of the cases, whatever feature you talk about, they want it all. Even at the end, you know that it's going to impact the experience. You know that most of these features will not be used. But if you just plainly ask for it, then they say, yeah, of course, I want it. And just give you an example what we had. And actually, it was funny because yesterday in a discussion, some of you also mentioned this. In our early prototypes, we included the feature of using an album cover art to define the colors of light effects. So what it would mean, the light effects that you would have would try to follow the colors that the artist used on the album art. However, the feedback was really lukewarm. People find it gimmicky. They kind of tried it because it was that it's interesting, but none of the participants really used it afterwards. So they tried once, twice, and then they find out that maybe it worked for some of the songs, but it doesn't work across of multiple songs, especially when you play a playlist consistent of different, for example, bands. So we removed it. And as you can imagine, every follow-up study, we had a big subset of participants who kept recommending this feature and saying that this is a must-have feature that you need to have. Now, and again, so you have the dilemma here. Do you follow the request of your consumers and you introduce the feature knowing pretty well that it probably won't be used, or do you ignore it? And again, as I said, we don't have an answer for it. Of course, the feature is already released, and we don't have the album cover art. But from first early feedbacks that we can read already, we probably will have to introduce it because people are still keep asking for it. So this is one of these situations where you don't know that you probably need to follow the request of many consumers, even though that you know that it's maybe not the best feature that you can have. So if we think about the development stage of our project and kind of the lessons that we learned, the first one is about impact of the context. Especially in our case, the context gives you a way richer and more realistic feedback on your proposition. And if you have a connected system, like in our case, it also allows you to kind of stress test it before you release, so you can identify also issues with your system, not necessarily with user experience. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do laboratory studies. So in our case, laboratory studies we used for really fine-tune some of the aspects of the proposition. And in our case, it was fine-tuning, for example, the dynamic parameters of the algorithm. If you think about fleeting experiences, and I forgot to mention it on the previous slide, is that in one of the field studies that followed immediately the laboratory studies, we wanted to be able to measure the experience of people, not overall, but experience when they listen to a particular type of the songs, because we're not sure how algorithm performs depending on the type of the songs. So we used intercept surveys. So what would happen if you listen for the music or use our app for about 15 minutes, in some cases, the short survey will pop up asking you about their experience. And because we have a connected system, all the song data is in the cloud, so we could match what music you listen to just before filling in the survey. And what I'm trying to say here is that when you do that, so when you try to capture these fleeting experiences, it's important also to use other aspect of your system to capture the context under which this feedback was given. Another one, impact of tests in the prototype. As I mentioned, in our case, what we discovered is that you have to be you have to be a bit more cautious about the positive feedback when you test it with early prototypes. And what I mean by that is that the positive feedback could indicate that you are trying to address the right need, but not necessarily that the solution you propose is right for it. Again, this is what we learned in our investigations. And finally, what I mentioned already about testing environments. Again, if you test using the consumer boards or beta platforms, you should always keep in mind the fact that participants will share and read each other's opinions and thus will influence them. So that's something that you always need to take into account, even if you do an individual interviews afterwards with some of the participants. Now, I'm almost at the end, essentially at the end of my presentation, but of course, we're not at the end of our journey. As I mentioned 2 days ago, the system becomes available for the millions of Hue users. And that's where the real stuff begins. Because now we will be able to test it and understand how it performs with way larger community of people. And we already started it. And we started from social listening. So essentially, we're looking at what people post on app reviews, what they discuss on Reddit or Discord or any other social platforms. We look at the usage data. So we see how people use them, what palettes they use, what dynamic setting they use. And I could say right now to you is that our Hue users do not differ that much from everyone else. So the top listened song is Ed Sheeran, Bad Habits, so, which is also a top for Spotify, but it's also top for people who use it with light effects. Luckily for us, our light effects work really well with that song. Before closing my presentation, I want to again reiterate, and I'm sorry that I'm coming back to the context all the time, reiterate some of our learning points as a takeaway message. So first of all, if the context is important for your prototype, please understand the consequences of testing this only in the lab. And try as much as you can to test your ideas in the wild as soon as possible. The second is about reproducibility. It's now very popular to have these short iteration cycles and they say, oh, just 5 people is enough to test. And it's great. But if you do that, please be ready that the results of your studies from one iteration to other iteration could swing greatly. And not because of the changes you made in your prototype, but because of a small sample size. And finally, the combining methods. And of course, this is applicable when you use the connected systems. And in our case, I think we were able to combine qualitative methods like interviews and observations with a quantitative method of collecting the usage data, connecting sensor data, and combining it together. And it gave us way better picture of how people use our application. And with that, I would like to finish my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Are there any questions? Because I certainly do have one.
Yeah,
you were telling us about the ambience lights, like coming home, relaxing, get in a relaxed mood. Is it possible to turn it the other way around, like to have the Spotify playlists combined with my mood? So I set on the light, like set it a bit down, get a bit warmer, and then have the right playlist. Would that be possible as well?
Yeah. So indeed, thank you for your understanding. Thank you for your question. Currently, the way because of course we kind of are bound by the partnership, and so our application cannot control the Spotify. The Spotify can control our application, but not other way around. But indeed, the idea of setting a relaxed mood that automatically combines the light setting and a music or a sound. And if you think maybe even more, that doesn't have to be a music. It could be a soundscapes, for example, like for the meditation or for the relaxation. And I think creating these multisensorial experiences could be very compelling to the users. Just think about situations like relaxing or trying to concentrate or meditating. All of this combined together could make your experience richer and more immersive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but for now, this is not possible. So what you will have to do, you will have to choose a relaxing playlist on Spotify, and you should set a relaxing light effects on our system, and then you will get the combination. Yeah.
But maybe we just let a year go and then hear from you again about the other way around. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's a question.
Hi, thank you. Super interesting. I was wondering, methodologically, how did you decide when to test often with a small sample, and then when is the right moment to switch to a larger sample. Because I was wondering, you said in the beginning, or it's also one of your takeaways, the danger is when you initially test with a smaller sample and you look at whether people like it or not, you might get wrong signals.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay, so it was actually driven by two things. The first, what we say, the maturity of our prototype. And it's both related to the algorithm itself. So when we felt that okay, we fine-tune all of the settings and so on. But I think in our case, it was also a bit driven by the limitations of the prototype. If you want to run a large-scale study, to be able to do that, especially in the field, your system should be essentially be autonomous. It should be, people should be able to set it up and use it, right? With a small group, we could always instruct participants. We can even visit participants and do the setup ourselves. But with a larger group, it's just not attainable. So essentially, while the algorithm might not necessarily change much from the smaller groups to the larger group, the maturity of the prototype itself, so the whole cloud system and connectivity, matured a lot so that people could just run a simple prototype application and they can just use it. So in our case, it was more driven by the maturity of the prototype and ability to test, essentially do kind of unmoderated type of testing where people could just use it at home. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was super insightful. I'm just wondering if you're able to share any insights as to the audience. So, demographically, for instance, can you share anything as to how the users of this integration compared to a Spotify user or your normal users?
Well, so I think at this moment, it would be very difficult to say because the feature is just released. So if you think about it, because it's a smart home connected system, so we try to reach out to the different demographics, but you would often see that the person who purchased, for example, the system are usually a male, because of the still kind of this, a bit I would say even a stigma, or it's a smart home connected system, which in our view is a bit wrong because many of the systems are very easy to use and it's not necessarily about technical complexity. But what I would want to say is that currently in all of our studies we always try to do a good balance in terms of who we invite for the participation in the studies. But in the real world, it will be very difficult now for us to say because we do not collect this type of information. So maybe, let's say, in half a year, if we would run a large-scale market research or survey trying to understand what people who are actually using it more frequently, then I would be able to answer this question. But at this moment, I could say that the adoption rate is really fast. So we see every day thousands and thousands of people are joining in because the feature was available as early access already in the past, but now we see that it's skyrocketing. So we know that few users adopting it, but I really cannot tell you the demographics of who is actually using it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for sharing your experiences.
Yeah, thank you.